Hey, I'm Alex Lewis, your host for Taiwan Talk. This week, we continue our monthly look at Taiwan in Time. Taiwan in Time is a column about Taiwan's history that is published every Sunday and spotlights important or interesting events around the nation that have anniversaries that particular week. It is written by Taipei Times features reporter Cheung, who we'll be talking to today. Han, how's it going?
Pretty good. Having a pretty busy month.
Yeah, man, you had, we're going to go through 5 articles for this episode.
Yeah, there were 5 weeks in October. So
yeah, man, that's
5 to do.
That's pretty rare, I guess, but 5 weeks in a month. But let's get into it. So we're going to talk about the Great Aboriginal Migration. This is October 1st to October 7th.
Yeah, it was like a mass migration of early day Aboriginal people. They were forced out of their original homelands by the Han Chinese settlers, but this one was interesting because there was an incident called the Guobainian incident, and that led to destruction of the Aborigines around Puli area. So basically, the government stepped in. This was Cheung Dynasty, so the government stepped in and chased away the Han Chinese and prevented anybody from going into the Aboriginal areas again. But they were so weakened by the ordeal that they had to invite other Aborigines, the Pingpud, so they call them Plains Aborigines now, and they had to invite them to settle there from the west coast where they were also facing pressure to bolster their numbers, and they ended up getting assimilated in the end. So that was pretty...
Yeah, so they invited them to their homeland, and then they kind of lost their culture because there were just so many, immigrants coming to the area.
Yeah, they were thousands. It came in many waves. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, I've heard of, and these the descendants of these tribes are still there, which is interesting because a lot of them have been wiped out in their original or assimilated in their original homeland, but they were able to survive because they moved to Puli. And there are 6 tribes that still have their presence in that area, and they have been making a lot of noise of late. They want, because they're not recognized by the government, so they want recognition.
Oh, I see. Can you talk a little bit about the circumstances that led to them inviting the tribes from the western coast to their land?
So there was a Guobainian incident. So basically the Han Chinese were running out of land, and so they were looking at, the lands beyond, because the Qing Dynasty had pretty clear boundaries. So this was Aboriginal land and this was Han Chinese land. You can't go past this point because they didn't want any conflict, and there were a lot of Han Chinese rebellions, so they really didn't want them to gain access to the mountain lands, so they could do guerrilla tactics and stuff like that. But basically, this guy, they hatched this plan, and they were able to obtain a permit to go settle that area. And once they were in, they went crazy, and they just started killing everybody and taking all the land. And then finally, they encountered this tribe that was strong enough to resist them, so they kind of tricked them. They told them if they gave them antlers, they would leave the area, so the dudes went to look for antlers, and during that time, they invaded the village. And then when the Qing Empire, they sent people to investigate, they just bribed them off. So it took them about 2 years to find out what's going on, and by then, they had been greatly weakened. So after the Han Chinese were kicked out, they needed help, so they thought it would be a good idea to invite these other tribes from the western coast to settle there. But
yeah,
those
definitely
were pretty assimilated already, as evidenced by the signing of contracts and all that kind of stuff, because that was not in their original culture.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened to the guy? It sounds like he was a piece of work. The guy who spearheaded, the inroads into the Aboriginal lands. Whatever happened to him?
So they, the government evacuated all of them, and he got off he was sentenced to a beating, and then they kind of prevented any non-Aborigines from entering the area. For another 100, for almost another century. So they were able to preserve their culture. for longer. So that's why those people there still trace their identity back to these original tribes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I hope he got a really good beating. Yeah, sounds like a piece of work.
Yeah, I hope so.
That's messed up, dude.
Actually, there's something interesting about this one.
Tell me what's interesting about it.
Yeah, it's actually because there's no really timeline to this story because I wanted to write about it somehow. So I actually came out of, I went to this Taokas, so it's like Taokas tribe, and in Miaoli, and they were having like a harvest festival kind of thing. So I went, and they're part of the people who were fighting for their identity, and they were talking about how they had to suppress their identity for so long, and these are the people. They're still in Miaoli, but they talk of a branch of the same people who migrated to Puli, which is what this story is talking about. And I actually met someone at the festival who traveled from Puli to Miaoli to take part in the festival. So it's not a short distance. So I started wondering like how this tribe got separated so far. So I started looking into it, and that's how this article came about.
Oh, interesting. So kind of just out of your life here in Taiwan, you kind of looked back.
Pretty much, yeah. And the Taokas is one of the tribes that are in Puli, who are
one of the 6 tribes.
Yeah, one of the 6 tribes. So I found that really, interesting. I was just looking into it, and I found this huge, backstory.
Yeah, that's really cool. Some of the best stories if you just kind of look in your life and dig around.
Right. Yeah. So I'm trying to do that more with my articles now. Because I've been doing this for 3 years, and I'm kind of running out of dates to
I can imagine, man.
Things too, but there's still so much about Taiwanese history that you can find using different methodologies according to like current events or like things like that. And there's another one this month that I did the same thing with that we'll be talking about later.
Is it about the Itatao tribe?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, let's talk about that now.
Yeah, felt like that's really connected to the one we just talked about.
October 15th to October 21st, and it's the title is A Community That Needed to Change.
So this is, so that's also about like oppression of Aborigines by like different colonial powers. So it's really connected to the last one. And this is also based on a current event, like as I was reading the Taipei Times, and then there was a story about this tribe who really wanted to change their name. They were the Tao people, Shaozu, but they had, a lot of things in the area were called Dehua, which means, like changing through virtue. So it was kind of like the idea that these were uncivilized people that needed to be, needed like the majority, the rulers to show virtue and compassion and kind of like in order to civilize them. So
I see. Yeah, so like it's like they needed to change.
Right. So they hated that name, so they really wanted to change it. And the week before I wrote that story, they had just successfully changed the name of the local police station from Dehua to Itatao. So that got me like looking into why do they hate this name so much? What's going on? And it turns out that because they're in Sun Moon Lake. So they're kind of remote, but not too remote. So they were kind of in between. And so back then in the Qing Dynasty, they separated the Aborigines into like civilized one and non-civilized ones. And the non-civilized ones, they really basically like how assimilated they were. So this story just kind of talks about the history from the Qing Dynasty when they like built a Chinese-style academy on their sacred island to like educate the people, and then to the Japanese times where they were trying to do the same, and they even like submerged their sacred island to build like the Sun Moon Lake Dam, and then the KMT came and then like did the same thing, and they even changed all their names, like original names. So like the island, they called it Guanghua, which is like glory to Chinese or something like that. So that's why it just and they only like in recent after 2000 where they started to change all of this back to the original names.
I see. Yeah, so they kind of went from colonizer to colonizer, oppressive act to oppressive act, and now they're trying to fight back more specifically just for their name.
Yeah, and it's relevant because it's still going on. I mean, their next step is to change the elementary school name back because that's also the Hua Guoshao. So.
Has that name changed?
Not yet. That's their next goal. They changed the village name first, and then they changed the police station. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to try to. So they're slowly eradicating all this, the past trauma. It's still going on, and I think it's a good thing. And they're fighting for this. It's been too long. It's been more than 200 years of being oppressed and being told that they need to, be civilized and be changed, and so hence the title name.
A community that needs to change.
Like someone just comes in and keeps telling you, you gotta be like that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, let's go to the next article, or the one that was from October 8th to October 14th, the 5 lights to stardom. I found this one really interesting because the most modern one. So it's talking about the launch of the 5 Lights Award that ran for 33 years on television.
Yeah. So it was launched on October 9th, 1965, and ran for 33 years until 1998. So, and it was called the 5 Lights Awards, Wuzhenjiang, and it was pretty much like a talent show, like singing, dancing, like all kinds of. I mean, the main thing was singing, but they also had like other challenges.
Yeah, you kind of see it right now, like in modern times, right? There's American Idol, but also like The Voice, America's Got Talent, X Factor. There's a whole bunch of shows right now.
Yeah, there's all that. So basically, that was kind of Taiwan's first talent show competition, and ran for 33 years. Was really popular. I watched it when I was little, but I never knew about the origins of it and why it was called the 5 Lights. And I think that was the most interesting. Was it was actually started by a pharmaceutical company who wanted to promote its brand, and its logo had 5 circles. So they decided to turn the 5 circles into 5 lights. That's how it got started, and it just kept going on and on. But soon, I think later, it was being overtaken by a lot of different shows. But a lot of famous people like Zhang Huimei.
Ame, right?
Yeah, Ame. And then Jackie Wu came out of that show. LA Boys, like a lot of, quite a few people made it big through that show, which is not unlike today. They still, the singing contest, it's still popular. It hasn't gone, like the show's gone away, but people still like watching that stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Was it kind of like a cultural touchstone of its time?
Yeah, I think so. And then it kind of paved the way for like modern shows today too, even though the show itself didn't survive. And it spawned a lot of different knockoffs too. Like the other channel did a 6 Lights Award. And, I couldn't put that into the article, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And they still bring it back every now and then, like in movies or like during New Year's celebration. They'll make a mock stage with 5 lights, and it's been brought back. Like I think every now and then they'll do like a special or something and try to like revisit it. So it's kind of like a really important cultural memory that everybody is kind of familiar with because it ran for so long. So even though it ended in 1998, a lot of young people undoubtedly still know about it.
Yeah, and it's a perfect show for Taiwan because for the love of karaoke here, right?
Yeah. I think, and in the beginning, actually, I think it was the audience who was going on and performing. So I think that was interesting because like anybody could go on there and be a star. I think it's later that it turned into a more strict audition process, like the X Factor and American Idol.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. And finally, the last 2 articles that you wrote were about Chiang Kai-shek and the military. So let's start from the October 22nd to the October 28th one, how the Great Victory was won.
Yeah, so that one was about the Battle of Guningtou. And for a long time, it was called 古宁头大捷, which was the great victory of 古宁头, because it was pretty much the only victory that the KMT had against the communists at the end of the Chinese Civil War. So they were on the brink of being kicked out of China. Like they were almost gone, and the communists decided to invade Jingmen, and somehow the KMT fought them off. And a lot of historians say that this actually stopped the invasion to Taiwan because they were planning on taking Jingmen, and obviously the next target would be Taiwan because that's like the next that's right across the strait from Jingmen. So, and then the Americans, got involved, and the Korean War broke out, and a lot of things happened. It wasn't just because of this battle, but this battle kind of stopped and kind of gave bought KMT some time, and actually led to the communists never coming to Taiwan. So it's a pretty significant. It's not significant to the communists because it's just such a tiny battle compared to all the big ones they fought in China. But to the KMT, it was really important. And they actually saw the war as a turning point in the Chinese Civil War. They were like, yeah, now we can rally and beat the communists. Well, that never happened. But I would say if I were the KMT, I'd be pretty proud of that.
Yeah, it's a battle that turned the tides.
Yeah.
Could you give us a few, reasons or takes as to why or how they won the battle?
Yeah, there were quite a few takes. I think a big part of it was just timing. Yeah, the communists got there, and then I think their departure got delayed a lot because if they attacked earlier when it might have been different, but they kind of kept delaying because they were trying to get boats and stuff like that, and then that gave the KMT time to bolster the defenses on the island, and they sent a couple groups from southern China to Jingmen to defend it, and Hu Lian led his brigade there, and that pretty much they were well prepared. I think that was the biggest thing, and the communists were careless because they were winning so much. They didn't think this would be a problem, and they acknowledged that actually. Even the Chinese, I read a Chinese account on it, and they acknowledged the same thing. The KMT were there were a lot of coincidences, the communists were doing a secret landing, and there was a KMT patrolman by the shore where they were landing, and he accidentally stepped on a landmine, and that caused panic, and they started looking in that direction, and they found the troops landing. So, they were lucky in a lot of ways, but they were just more prepared than the enemy was.
Was this one of Chiang Kai-shek's biggest victories in the war?
Yeah, I think I would say so. At least in the last part of the war, because that whole year they had been losing. After losing the Shubang Huizhan in China, and then the communists crossed the Yangtze River in January that year, and they pretty much didn't win anything after that. What's interesting about this story is after I had 3 people message me telling me that they had a relative who served or was caught in that war. So yeah, my friend had an aunt or grandmother, a grandmother who served as a nurse in that war, and my other friend's dad was 8 years old when that happened, and they actually eventually fled Jingmen for Singapore, which is where they still live. So there was a lot of there were quite a few responses.
Yeah, you kind of don't really think about the fallout of a victory even in war.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, Jingmen was just a war zone all the way until the 90s, pretty much.
Oh, wow. All right, so progressing on, we're going to talk about the last article that you wrote for the month of October, the military advice from the former enemy.
Yeah. So this one I found really interesting, actually, because it was Chiang Kai-shek actually recruited all these Japanese officers after the war, World War II, to come to Taiwan and serve as military advisors. And I'm like, didn't he fight against the Japanese for like so many
he
years?
did.
And
He totally did.
yeah,
There was like this 1938. I looked it up, and so this is like one of the biggest acts of environmental warfare that ever happened in history, right? So like Chiang Kai-shek released like dams to kind of stop the Japanese troops in like the Second Sino-Japanese War, and it caused like so much devastation in China. So when I read this article, I was kind of surprised, or kind of just amazed at how things change in just like years.
Right. Yeah, and at that time, like I think his enemy was always the communists. Like he kind of saw the communists as the number one enemy. So it wasn't beyond him to ask for Japanese help to fight the communists and try to retake China, which never happened. But that was his goal. So I was curious, like why though? Like why Japanese in particular? So we kind of looked at his motives. He was actually trained in Japan. He went to military school in Japan and served in the Japanese army before returning to China to help overthrow the Qing dynasty. And he was actually really impressed by like the discipline of the Japanese army and their training and how successful they were, throughout the first half of the 1900s and even before, when they were able to beat the Russians and and they were pretty successful. So he was pretty. So he wanted to know like why they were so disciplined and like things like that. So and then. Yeah, he just believed that military education was like a main difference between the strength of the Japanese army and his army. And so that was always in his head. So, and by that time, defeating the communists was his one and only priority. So working with the Fourth Army didn't seem to really bother him.
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So under the pretext of anti-communism, he secretly recruited all these like Japanese officers to Taiwan. I think there were about 14 in the first batch, and this number grew to I think it grew quite a bit for the first couple of years, but it kind of like fell apart at the end. And by like 1968, there was like one dude left in Taiwan, and the rest kind of just went back to Japan over time. But this article doesn't really talk about what they actually did in
Taiwan. Yeah, what did they actually do?
So they were mostly involved in training and organizing like different military groups and partnerships. But most of it was training. They were known as very strict military instructors, and so that's mostly what they did. They actually went to the front lines for the 823 artillery bombardment on Yunnan. So but they were mostly in an advisory role. Yeah, but I thought it was I couldn't cover that in the article, but it was the more interesting part to me was like the formation of this group and how did this even happen. Apparently, they had to do it all secretly because otherwise Americans wouldn't like that. So,
oh yeah, that's right. This is right after World War.
It was right after World War. This was November 1, 1949, when the first guy arrived in Taiwan, and that was even before Chiang permanently retreated to Taiwan. So yeah, he wasted no time. But I might revisit what they actually did in Taiwan.
Yeah, you just have to wait 1 year, right?
Yeah, I have to wait 1 year, or I can find another way to put it in. We'll see.
Okay, so what's the next month looking like for you?
Next month, let's see. I actually haven't decided yet. because it's still Wednesday.
Okay. What are you doing in your social life? Because it seems that your social life might indicate what might be written about in your articles.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
No plans yet, huh?
Nothing big going on, actually. But
okay.
if I run across anything, I'm definitely going to write about it.
Thank you to Han for coming on the show, and thank you for listening to Taiwan Talk. I'm Alex Lewis.